Oil has become a very big problem, not just for Nigeria, but for the entire world. You see, apart from the obvious environmental impact of fossil fuels and non-renewable energy on the planet, there are a handful of countries all over the world whose economies have become so dependent on crude oil that the inevitable energy transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy is sure to leave them in situations much worse than they were before the discovery of oil. Nigeria is one of these countries. The saddest part about it all is that Nigeria has not even been able to capitalize on its oil abundance and the various periods of oil boom of the previous decades, as well as many of these other countries have. Yet, despite this, we will be suffering just as badly as any of them when peak oil comes. Peak oil is a hypothetical moment where oil extraction will reach its peak and production starts to decline. And of course, one thing that is even more devastating than any future effect a decline in petroleum demand may have on the country is the incredible pain, suffering, stagnation, and backwardness that the discovery and mismanagement of oil has already caused in the past. Nigeria is the largest oil and gas producer in Africa. At a point, we exported more than 1 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States of America. Not only does our oil sector contribute to about 9% of the entire country's GDP, it is also an absolutely crucial part of the entire country's budget. In 2018, the oil and gas sector provided 65% of government revenue, equating to about $34 billion. So, more than half of the money the government of Nigeria has is oil money. In 2011 alone, this figure was as high as $68 billion. From 2010 to 2019, the country earned more than $400 billion from just oil and gas. What's more than 80% of our export value in the country was generated by the oil and gas sector. Now, surely, anyone who has a basic knowledge of how life works would know that this is not a particularly healthy thing. If you've ever lived with a singular source of income, you understand more than anyone that this is not an ideal way to live, especially in a world where things are constantly changing and out of our control no matter how much we try to keep them stable. Through the years, Nigeria has experienced every possible extreme consequence of this phenomenon. There have been moments in history where the value of oil has soared and Nigeria has made a lot of money from it. Sadly, there have also been moments where the value has taken an incredible tumble, and when this happened, the economy has suffered badly. The COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, really did a number on oil production around the world. In Nigeria, export dropped significantly, and data showed that as the demand for oil went down, so did its price. So, from being the source of 9.5% of the country's GDP in 2019, petroleum contribution to the Nigeria economy dipped to 5.8% in 2020. That is a huge 3.6% decrease. It recovered again to 9.25% in early 2021, but dipped again to 7.4% in the last quarter of the year. Surely, all of these ups and downs cannot be a good thing for anybody. Instability is never a good look for an economy. At some point, about 90% of our foreign exchange earnings came from oil. This is a strong reason why the Naira's value is always falling and inflation remains a big problem for Nigerians every day. Sadly, the instability of prices is far from the worst evil the petroleum industry has wrought on Nigeria. Now, we all know the basic history of crude oil in Nigeria. How there were searches spanning 5 decades and a couple of world wars before Shell BP finally discovered oil in the Niger Delta. We all know about the pollution and social instability that arose as a result of oil production in that region of the country. One would think that at the very least there will be something to show for it at the end of the day. If you are going to spend so much opportunity cost on producing a commodity, at least there should be tangible results to justify this act. A functional country perhaps, with great healthcare, constant electricity, remarkably low unemployment rate, and fantastic security and prosperity for its citizens. If only. The discovery of oil in Nigeria was met with great joy and enthusiasm. Finally, the country has a solid base from which to propel itself to the top of world politics and achieve the lofty goals everyone knows it can. Sadly, the outcome is a lot more heartbreaking than most would have predicted. There is something known as a resource curse. This is a phenomenon whereby the presence of a valuable resource like petroleum ends up making a country worse than it would have been without it. Nigeria is a prime example of a country suffering from resource curse. This is crucial because the key thing about resource curse is that it is always indicative of corruption, vile, unabashed corruption. Yes, Nigeria has oil, a lot of it. But oil money, of course, is paid to the government and not to the people. As of 2000, oil and gas exports accounted for more than 98% of our export earnings and about 83% of federal government revenue. This was 14% of our GDP at that point. Obviously, you need a majority of highly conscientious, trustworthy, and capable sets of people to look after all of this wealth and optimize its use. Well, sadly, if there's something we've never been blessed with in this country, it is a majority of highly conscientious, trustworthy, and capable sets of leaders to look after all of our wealth. So, despite the fact that over $101 billion were generated by the oil industry between 1958 and 1983, nearly all of these funds were siphoned away into private bank accounts and frivolous projects. It is estimated that more than $380 billion have been stolen or wasted in this way since independence. Keep in mind, all of this was happening while the federal debt became so high that at a point, Nigeria started paying back our debt with over 44% of the federal revenue because the IMF was on our neck asking for their money back. If the discovery of oil had only brought out corrupt individuals and facilitated corruption and theft in that sector alone, perhaps things would have been better than they are now. But no, as it happened, its effect didn't just stop with the petroleum industry alone. It spread its vile, cancerous wings all over every sector of the country and caused so much damage that we still feel its impact today. You see, one of the consequences of discovering such a resource like petroleum in so much abundance in such a country as ours is that, along with the other terrible consequences mentioned earlier, it also causes a shift of valuable labor, capital, and resources from other key sectors of the economy into this one alone. So, for Nigeria, despite being one of the strongest economies in terms of agricultural production, the entire country began to divert its attention to oil and oil alone. Thanks to the remarkable oil boom in the 1970s, the shift began in full force. Whereas Nigeria had previously been the world's lead exporter of cocoa production in the 70s dropped by about 43%. And this was not the only area to suffer. The production of other important income-generating products like rubber, groundnut, and cotton also plummeted by 29%, 64%, and 65% respectively in just a few years between 1972 and 1983. Production of foodstuffs also took a colossal hit, causing a devastating impact which we haven't recovered from till this day. In the 1960s, you see, just after independence, Nigeria was more than self-sufficient in producing its own foodstuff. 97% of our export revenue came from crops, but by the early 1980s, for the first time in our history, Nigeria started importing basic food items. Then of course, there is the question of the role that Nigerian oil industry has played in hindering Nigerian democracy and derailing any attempt at true federalism. To refresh, federalism is a system of government where there is an overarching federal government and a handful of state governments, all of which have a great deal of autonomy and control over their own affairs. The defining characteristic of true federalism is that there is no concentration of power in one level of government over the other. Both tiers of government work together to ensure the good of the country as a whole without one significantly imposing over the other. Many have argued that the failure of true federalism in Nigeria is due significantly to its plentiful oil resources. The federal government was so keen on controlling the revenue coming from oil that they took away the last vestiges of autonomy the state government had. Not all blessings are good. Sometimes you have to be ready. If not, your new windfall can end up doing way more harm than good. Nigeria as a country has found out this truth in a particularly harsh way. Now, of course, this is not to say that blessings are a bad thing. Yes, countries can survive without oil, and countries can thrive with oil. The most important thing is to learn how to manage this situation and, most importantly, learn from it. The resource curse is not limited to Nigeria alone. Lots of countries all over the world have faced the same problem. Some have found a way to recover. Some, through proper planning and leadership, have managed to evade the curse altogether. There is so much to learn from them, and that is why in our next video of this series, we'll be taking an exhaustive look at some of the countries to have recovered from and avoided the oil curse effectively and what we can learn from them. And if you're particular about learning more about how Nigeria works and how we can work together, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you know immediately we release our next video.